Imagine this: a new road, a shiny port, a gleaming rail line, all built with Chinese money, cranes, and engineers. At first, it looks like a gift. Crowds cheer when the ribbon is cut. Politicians pose for photographs. But years later, the bills come due. The big promised jobs, growth, a future starts to look smaller next to looming loan payments. Hospitals and schools feel the squeeze. People in the streets start asking, who really benefited from the project? That simple cycle, promise, build, repay, is the story playing out across towns, cities, and capitals, from Asia to Africa to the Caribbean. In 2025, the world woke up to a new, harsher chapter of that story. The loans are coming due, and a lot of countries are pushing back. The wave of repayments China expects from poorer nations this year is huge, big enough to make governments across the global south sweat. When journalists and politicians first started talking about a debt trap, it sounded like a spy novel. The line went, China lends money to build ports and roads. The borrower country can't pay. China seizes the asset or forces a long lease. Strategic control moves into Beijing's hands. The Hambantota port in Sri Lanka became the image everyone used, a modern, concrete symbol of a small country, apparently forced to hand over a strategic asset. The facts behind Hambantota are more complicated than the headline, but the image stuck. A port built, a country saddled with debt, and a 99-year lease on a chunk of coastline that felt like a handover. That sequence of events, often oversimplified, is part of why the idea of debt trap diplomacy caught on, and why more people now watch closely when China's money shows up in their towns. But the story has shifted. China was once a big lender, building fast and everywhere. Now it is facing the bills itself. In 2025, developing countries are expected to send roughly $35 billion to China in loan repayments, and the poorest 75 nations alone are due to pay about $22 billion of that. In plain words, money that could pay for vaccines, teachers, or food subsidies is scheduled to leave poor countries and flow back to lenders in Beijing. That pressure changes the math for both borrower and lender. No wonder governments that once welcomed the cash are now bargaining, delaying, or publicly complaining. Look at Zambia. It defaulted on its foreign debt in 2020 and spent years negotiating with creditors, including major Chinese lenders. The process wasn't tidy. Debts were reclassified, deals were slow, and the country had to turn to the IMF for a program to stabilize the economy. Zambia's experience shows two things. First, China is not the only cause of a crisis. Weak commodity prices, bad fiscal choices, and global shocks matter. And second, China is willing to negotiate but also insists on being paid. Even when restructuring happens, it can be long and politically painful. The recent IMF extensions and negotiations around Zambia's program in 2025 underline that many of these arrangements remain fragile and that the debt book to China is a long-term headache for some countries. So what does pushback actually look like? It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet diplomacy, a minister calling in a Chinese bank to renegotiate terms. Sometimes it is legal action in national courts. Sometimes it's politicians canceling or delaying projects when they come to power. And sometimes, crucially, it's ordinary people protesting on the streets when they see public services cut to pay foreign creditors. That mix of actions is important to understand because what has often been painted as China seizes an asset overnight is usually more protracted. Renegotiations, conditional bailouts, and political bargaining, not simple takeovers. But that slower, messier reality does not make the public anger any less real. But why did this situation arise in the first place? A few reasons that often get overlooked. First, many projects are priced and designed in ways that favor the contractor. Chinese firms win bids, supply chain costs go back to China, and local jobs are sometimes less than promised. Second, loans are often structured in foreign currencies. When a borrower's local currency falls, the cost of repayment explodes. Third, many governments sign deals without full transparency. Hidden clauses, confidentiality, and complex financing lines mean the public and even some officials didn't fully see the trap until much later. Finally, Infrastructural promises are bets on future returns. If the road or port doesn't attract the trade or traffic expected, the revenue to repay the loan never arrives. Put together, those factors explain why projects that gleam on the ribbon-cutting day can feel like bricks on the neck of the next government. These are not just technical problems, they are political problems, and politics is messy. The more interesting and non-obvious part is how domestic politics in borrower countries interacts with foreign lending. Often, leaders who take on big foreign loans do it for immediate political gain. A new road is visible within an election cycle. Citizens see progress. Patronage networks can benefit. The long-term cost-paying interest for decades is pushed onto voters who will later have to choose whether to cut health spending or raise taxes. That dynamic makes large infrastructure lending strangely attractive to outgoing officials. The praise today, the bill tomorrow. This misalignment between who receives the short-term rewards and who bears the long-term cost is a core reason why unsustainable deals happen. No foreign lender, however big, can fix poor domestic governance. Another twist: China's lending itself has changed. After years of heavy spending, Beijing has slowed new overseas loans. It is now more selective, and, because it too faces economic pressures at home, more interested in getting repaid. This shift means creditor-debtor relations are now more about collection and restructuring than about endless new projects. In practice, that makes China act sometimes like a private bank and sometimes like a strategic state actor, and both roles pull in different directions. The collector wants cash back. The strategist wants influence. Those aims don't always line up. Let's return to concrete examples to see how the theory plays out. Sri Lanka's Hambantota port is the story most people know. The port was built with Chinese money and expertise, but struggled to be profitable. The government leased it for 99 years to a Chinese firm in 2017 after facing big payment pressures. That image of a port taken by China is powerful and partly accurate, but it leaves out the nuance. The lease was part of a package of many decisions, including other forms of debt and domestic policy failures. Still, Hambantota became shorthand for a wider fear: strategic assets falling into foreign hands. Whether that shorthand is always fair or not, it changed how voters and policymakers think about foreign finance. Then there are the quieter modern fights: renegotiation and legal arguments. Countries like Zambia and others that hit trouble have pushed creditors to the negotiating table. The results show different approaches. Sometimes creditors take haircuts or extend maturities. Sometimes they swap loans for new ones with better terms. These are not clean outcomes. They are compromises that leave everyone under strain. For many governments, the solution is to ask the IMF or another multilateral lender to broker a restructuring, because international institutions bring rules and other creditors to the table. That's one reason why multilateral involvement has grown. It can force more structured negotiations and reduce the perception that one powerful creditor is dictating terms. Not all criticism of Chinese lending is fair. Some analysts and policymakers argue that projects under initiatives like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor were mischaracterized as traps when they were really long-term bets that could have paid off if managed better. In Pakistan, for example, some voices say the delays and lack of completion, not the loans themselves, turned the picture sour, and that if projects had been finished on time, Pakistan's economic story might look different. So the lesson is layered. Foreign finance can be a powerful tool for growth, but only when domestic institutions, project selection, and transparency work in tandem. Blaming the lender entirely misses half the story. There is an important human element here. When budgets are squeezed to meet debt payments, ordinary people feel it first in hospitals and schools. When governments renegotiate debt behind closed doors, citizens feel cheated. When a port is leased, or even just rumored to be leased, anxiety spreads about sovereignty and the future. Those emotional reactions are fuel for political movements. Leaders who promise to take back control or to cancel unpopular contracts can win votes. That means global finance changes national politics. A contract that looks technical in an office becomes a hot election issue on the streets. If you want to understand why debt becomes a political battle, Watch who gains from new projects today and who pays for them tomorrow. What does this mean for the balance of power? First, the Global South is no longer a passive recipient of money. Countries are now more willing to call out, renegotiate, and even refuse terms that harm them. That is the pushback. It does not always look like dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's a subtle shift in bargaining stance. Second, China's geopolitical playbook must adapt. If lending cannot reliably buy long-term influence because countries push back, China will need new tools, trade, soft power, investment strategies that offer clearer benefits, or more patient capital. Third, Western countries and institutions also have choices. Offer alternative financing, support debt transparency, or provide technical help to build better project selection processes in borrower countries. The end result could be a healthier, if more complex, global financing environment. If you live in a city that got one of these projects, what should you watch for? First, ask for transparency. What are the real terms of the loan? Who stands to gain? Second, hold leaders accountable for realistic feasibility studies. Will the project really make money to pay back the loan? Third, demand social protections in budgets so that essential services don't get cut when repayments come due. Public oversight matters because many bad deals persist precisely because no one asked the tough questions early on. There is no single villain in this drama. China's banks and contractors get criticized, sometimes rightly, sometimes unfairly. Borrower governments hold responsibility too. Global markets and shocks matter. But the key change right now, the reason this story is suddenly viral ready, is timing. The bills are due. The money moving from poor countries to China in 2025 is not small. That urgency sharpens politics, and it makes the whole question personal for millions. Will our kids have nurses in the clinic next year, or will we be paying a foreign creditor? Finally, there is a small, practical hope. Pushback can lead to better outcomes. When debts are renegotiated transparently, when projects are reevaluated, and when civil society gets a seat at the table, countries can avoid the worst outcomes. The new era could force better lending standards, stronger local planning, and more honest politics. But it will only happen if voters demand it, if international institutions support fairness, and if both lenders and borrowers accept that sustainable projects must benefit people first, not just balance sheets or strategic maps. So when you hear the words debt trap on the news, remember, it's not always a trap set by one sinister actor. It is often the result of a messy mix of ambition, poor planning, politics, and global shocks. And now, with repayments peaking and money getting tight, it is also a story of pushback. Countries are negotiating, courts are arguing, and people are protesting. That is the comeback. Not just of nations saying no to bad deals, but the comeback of public scrutiny. And when the public looks closely, the old, simple headlines rarely tell the whole truth. What they do tell us, though, is this: money built something, and now people want to know who owns the future.